Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for making time tonight, and we'll try our best to make it worth your while. We discussed a little while ago to make it more about just the exhibit. There's so much to talk about around this work in general, but also the work that Marc has created. And we set up the show maybe 2 weeks ago. It's been a really wonderful journey, and quite recently I ran into Daniel, and through Randy was here as well, and quickly decided to make this happen. So I'm really excited. I'm really pleased for all of you to be here and make time so fast. So I'm going to start off with introducing the panelists. The subject of the evening is contemporary art in a tech-driven world. As we all know, we're in a very tech-driven world, right? We can't barely function without a phone or a smartphone. We can't do a wire without technology and everything else. So we really depend on it. And so how do you translate that into art, and how does it affect everything that we do? So Daniel Doubrovkine, DB, he introduced himself as DB, I understand that part, it's a little bit quicker, is a seasoned entrepreneur, technologist, CTO at Artsy.net in New York, the largest online fine art marketplace publication. Daniel graduated from the University of Geneva, speaks various languages, is a father of two girls, 6 and 9.
No, boy and girl.
Oh, boy and girl, sorry. He joined Microsoft as a development lead, was director at Visible Path, then architect and development manager at application security. And Marc Gumpinger, the artist that we are hosting tonight, is an accomplished technology entrepreneur who built one of the world's most influential mobile social gaming networks, eventually acquired by BlackBerry. Prior to founding the gaming network, Marc earned a PhD in human biology. His visionary capacity and deep knowledge of the future and innovation led to his journey as an art maker. Marc leverages 3D software and associated algorithms also used by movie production companies to create utterly unreal worlds that he paints in large format all on canvas. And he's the father of 2 girls. Wonderful. So I'm going to jump right in. We're gonna have 3 different parts. One talking about the past, one talking about the present, and one talking about the future, all around the same subject of contemporary art in a technology-driven world. So I'll start with Marc. I want all of us to first go back 500 years. A universal genius is born in 1452. Leonardo da Vinci. He was a scientist, engineer, architect, and most predominantly also known for his artwork. As you all know, there's a painting that's about to go to auction, his depiction of Jesus at Christie's. And so which is really quite exciting. He died in 1519 in Amboise, which is close to Tours, and is also the city I was born in. Small side fact. I didn't know that until today. Yes, other information. So Marc, how do you see the influence of science, or period tech at the time, on art back then, and how does it relate to your approach today?
Right. Well, in general, art and technology have always been sister disciplines, and I think that's because of technology, or call it science, or advancements in general, have been the thing that drove mankind in our society. It's not an invention of the IT world, actually. It's an invention since we're here on planet Earth. So people have advanced their technology in tools, that's what the eras are called after, and even starting to grow a crop. That's technology. That's advancements in technology. So technology has always been at the forefront and center of the development of our kind, and brought us further and further ahead. So it's not astonishing why technology found its way into art. And contemporary art today, art back in the Renaissance, as we described it, was contemporary back then. So 500 years ago, contemporary art was what we now call the Renaissance. And contemporary art there played a lot of, technology played a lot of important roles. There's an interesting book by David Hockney called Secret Knowledge, where he describes how even Jan van Eyck used lenses to project their subject onto the canvas, and he did so by showing how the perspective of the chandelier of the Arnolfini wedding is different from the perspective of the floor, because light wasn't that high capacity as we have today. So they had to project individual parts of the motif onto the canvas to then actually do their painting. And if you look at the evolution of medieval art that was very flat and around religious motifs, very flat, and then all of a sudden within 30 to 50 years it advanced to what we today call photorealistic, or correctly said, naturalistic paintings, and that's because of technology. So technology was always part of our lives, part of art, but only today, because you asked what the influence on contemporary art today is, I feel that there has been a certain type of gap in how technology is being reflected in contemporary art. I don't know why. I have certain assumptions why it is, but I think it definitely there is a gap. Also, technology is not part of the academic education of artists, and so it's very tough for them to keep up, because this gap has started like 100 years ago already, and at the same time, like in the mid-19th century, the industrialization started and picked up steam. Steam obviously also a huge technological impact, and from there on there was really kind of a hockey stick in what advancements in technology we saw, and I feel art didn't keep up pace with those inventions that came up, and now it's a huge gap between this. And the problem is you cannot just go online and look it up what technology means and then do a little education thing for 6 months and then you're there. The problem is that there's so much there that it really takes a long time to get to a point where you can adequately communicate technology in contemporary art. And so for me, to sum it up, it's the natural backbone of our evolution, and it was always part of contemporary art, and today I see a certain gap, and that's what I'm trying to close.
Good. Thank you. So when first meeting Marc, actually, I connected to a modern day DaVinci, and that was my connection in the beginning. But no, I really was fascinated from the beginning by your work, because that's a question really to be asked: how do you incorporate the time that we live in into an art piece, right? Because there's so many artists to this day that still try to replicate what has already been done, and how do you try to stand out of it? So I really, find you do an incredible job. So it's an honor to have you here, Daniel. Given your background as an active CTO at Artsy and your connection to practicing art yourself, which not many know, how do you see and how do you draw the connection, or ask differently, when do you draw the line between somebody that's an artist and somebody that's a creative director in a company? When are you an artist and when are you just creative?
It's a great question. I think art, this is not my own words, I think art begins where sanity ends. And I really like the idea of making art for no purpose. And I think that's a very subtle distinction between art and technology. Technology often is something that we create to have some use, it's a tool, some purpose, some outcome. We expect it to function in a certain way. And then when we can go and make something that doesn't have such purpose, we start calling it art. But that border is really thin. and often things go from one to another. And I really think of them as the same thing, and that frontier is kind of something that moves between those things. Oftentimes we can take technology and transform it into art by just declaring it. So that's another good definition of art, is anything that an artist calls art. We can take your Netscape browser and make it extremely useful 10 years ago, and today we'll run it on an old computer and call that art, and put it on under a category of net art. And that's glitchy and weird looking and strange. And at that time it was a technological revolution, but really it's all the same thing. So I think there's some dimensions like time, and there are some dimensions of who creates the object or the artifact. We shouldn't be talking about objects exclusively. And really it's about how we perceive it and how we see it. And once we see it as art, it is art. As my children will say, everything is art.
And can I follow up the question as well? I'd like to follow up the question as well on the importance of art in society today in history, and if you could elaborate on that.
It's interesting to me because I was born in the Soviet Union, and that question I find very odd. And I found it very odd because I was born in a country where art was the most important thing. Money was not very important, unless you had some absurd amounts of money. Food was not as important because we didn't necessarily have most of it, and on the other hand, it was kind of everybody was in the same boat. Having a job was for granted, and everybody was kind of like a drone working in a system. And the only thing that differentiated us humans was art. My grandfather was a writer, my father was a poetry translator, and these things were around me all the time. That was the entire intellectual stimulation. We went to theater, we saw museums, that was my life. And even when I got sick, my doctor would get paid with books because it was something else. And try to get a doctor in Moscow to a sick child, well, there are books that are not allowed, there are books that are forbidden, and there are books that are just plain rare. Everybody wanted to read, Maupassant and other things that were really edgy at that time, and the doctor was happy to show up within half an hour for just a copy of something like that. So art was the most important thing, and then I moved to Europe and finally moved to the United States, and here we are having a debate of how important is art. Well, I'm looking forward to the time when robots have taken over everything in our world. Art is again the most important thing. For me, it's just evidently the most important thing. That's all we are. That's what makes us human.
That's great. Great, thank you. Marc, the painting by Rene Magritte, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, basically defines something that's real or not, right? It's a concept of realism. How does that concept connect to your work as we see it now? And secondly, how do you see yourself as an artist grow within the path that you've chosen? And how do you see your future go from here? This being the second series. The first series, if I may elaborate on that, were mountains. And the title was, for example, Alps 138, and the 138 didn't stand for anything, it was just there to confuse us. And now the space subject. So
yeah, that's a very interesting question. Ceci n'est pas une pipe, the painting by Rene Magritte. When you stand in front of it and look at it, you see a pipe, you see a painting of a pipe, and below there's a text saying Ceci n'est pas une pipe. That's not a pipe. You're standing there and think, well, sure, it's a pipe, but actually it's not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe. And this is something that really influenced me a lot, because we're in our world today so often influenced by things where we use words like to friend someone on Facebook, or to follow someone, to like something. And these are words we grew up with, but they seem to turn into different meanings actually today. because everything's very virtual, we spend a lot of time on our mobile devices, on computers, and that's, again, actually to me the same surrealist question of, is this a real friend or is it a set of data in a database? I don't even know who that is anymore. Would I care for that person? Would I stand in? And so this question of that Magritte came up with is as current as it can be. And that's what I try to convey in the paintings here as well. Like, there's this painting here of this falling astronaut, and then there's a sculpture that shows almost exactly the same picture, and it's almost exactly the same size. So is the sculpture more real than this painting, or are both real because they exist, or are they both unreal because they show something that doesn't actually exist because it was all painted or crafted after a 3D model that only exists in the computer? But if it just exists in the computer, does it not exist? And actually these are very old, ancient questions. And that's why I think they are very, very contemporary questions. And at the end of the day, it's really just, what is your opinion that you build around this? And it's not to find an actual answer. It's more about raising the question and being aware of this fact that in times of algorithms, AI, big data, robots, even synthetic biology, there's so much around information and data, and that's cry or yelling out loud, I am real, but it is not. We are real, and that's also why I created the motifs and why I painted them, or why I painted the mountains. Although the mountains, the series, it's a depiction of mountains, but actually it's just algorithms. It's not a mountain at all. It looks like a mountain if you look at it, but this mountain doesn't exist anywhere. It's just an algorithm. And something as abstract as an algorithm can look or appeal to our eyes as a mountain that's so huge and massive. And that's where I wanted to show this dichotomy between irreal, real, wrong or false. And then we have this whole discussion around fake news and echo silos. And this is very contemporary topic, and it's just about being aware of this question and finding your own answers. I'm trying to create the awareness in times of our tech-driven world.
Fantastic. And do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more on the traditional medium that you use, which is oil and canvas?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people ask, oh, that's a photo. No, all the paintings you see here are very traditional oil on canvas paintings. So I only used pigment, oil, brushes, and a canvas. So all of the paintings you see like this could have been painted exactly like this 500 years ago. But still, they could not have been painted 500 years ago because the subject didn't exist. And that's something I really like very much. Also, given our days where we interact very often with glass-like perfect surface devices like our phones. And then if you look at it, yeah, it has the same appeal, but if you look at it from the side, you still see the brush strokes. And it's an additional dimension in our times of this perfect surface that is that reminds us of us, the human being.
Great. And then there's also, if you could elaborate on the path that you go and where it's going, where it goes from here.
Yeah. I started with oil paintings because I thought that this is a way to convey digital aesthetics in a way that people really understand it, because an oil painting is the most traditional medium. Obviously there were encaustics and other techniques before that, but oil painting is something people would understand. But then there's the sculpture, and that's just another kind of output medium, so to say, to the same database. And on the path, things that are coming up are light mappings to use the sculpture and project light on it, and by that way change the appeal of the surface, although the actual object doesn't change. And that's all based on the same data set, so to say. And so while I'm a little critical with technology, I totally grew up with it, and it's there, it's a tool. It's a tool in our hands. It totally, like with a knife, you can slice bread or you can kill someone. So it's totally up to you on how to use the technology. But still, I think there are a number of things you can really creatively do with it, and that's what I'm trying to kind of get to, opening up the bandwidth. I didn't want to start with a display because I was at at a trade fair and someone next to me looked at a screen and said, why am I supposed to pay X amount for a TV set? And then I thought, like, yeah, that's a very good question. And that's how I got to oil painting. That got me moved so much. And maybe I'm fortunate. My grandmother was a painter, my aunt was a painter, so there's something in the genes. And I always adhere to this medium. I just like that medium.
Great. Thank you. I should also add that Marc has actually been contacted by some government officials in Germany that really are trying to wrestle the idea of the importance of technology, because Germany is actually ironically fallen a little bit behind, whereas America is obviously way beyond, and I'm sure China, so it's interesting to see the power, the influence an artist can have on that, through creativity to get to real subject matters.
Yeah, but, I mean, we are living in a silent revolution, let's put it that way. Here in America, it is maybe not so obvious because it's being created here, but in other parts of the world, you see the lag. Like our chancellor said, we already lost the first half of the game. Like in soccer, it's divided into two sections. We already lost the first section. So we better keep up the pace and try to win the second half of that game. And it's really about communicating what digital revolution means to a broader audience. I mean, most of the CEO of the Fortune 500 companies know what is happening, but not everyone in the companies has fully understood what it means. Like if we talk about autonomous driving or Tesla electric cars, that's just the very tip of the iceberg. What that means is, right now we're facing that a number of things come together. It's autonomous driving, it's electric cars, it's car sharing, and the fact that the new generation doesn't care about the traditional brands as much anymore as they used to do before. So what that means for traditional companies is less cars being sold, because all the cars we see parking here is inefficiency, steel-made inefficiency. And so if they keep driving around, then you just hail one when you need it, and then it's gone again. So, but that means selling a lot less, and that means you need a lot less people working there. And that's an effect of the digital revolution. And what I'm trying to show here is just the very beginning of where we're going. It's very fascinating, but you gotta keep up with the pace and understand what's going on.
Great. Daniel, contemporary art and technology-driven world, which is the subject of tonight's panel. One thing is sure, that technology is relevant, and we are living in a technology-driven world. Now, combining that with contemporary art, a lot of artists try to express it, don't really always hit the point, but how do you see the importance of art within the days that we live in right now, and how important do you see for artists to wrestle the idea and embrace it and work it?
So I'm always very interested in works like yours that use technology as a tool, that use technology as a foundation. I'm a big fan of mechanical art, sometimes connected with computers, electronic music, those types of things. These are all technology-based art, and that is translated into something that we all experience, that we appreciate. And I think we already discussed the importance of art in general, but the embracing technology as a potential source, as an inspiration, and maybe as a story, I think is something that is new, that we're going to see a lot more. So in this case, these works have a background in technology, and that they are very traditionally painted oil paintings. They show space, which is an incredible revolution has occurred to put man into space, on the moon, and so on. These are all rooted in technology, and they tell that story. And the artifact in the end is ultimately not the technology piece as much, except maybe the sculpture that's out there, hand painted and all that. So I think the narrative about technology is vital as a whole new dimension. We haven't spoken as much about technology and art as an inspiration, as a background, as a foundation, as a tool, as we do now. So I'm excited for new mediums to emerge or new narratives to emerge out of this, and some very normal or traditional looking results that are based on something like this. But I think we also need to question what art looks like and what art is. And so on the completely opposite spectrum of oil painting, we have increased amounts of performance art. We have a lot of experiences around art. We have the same feelings of what art does to us, but maybe it doesn't follow the mold of being square or being something that is using pigments or anything like that. So there's one of the most influential books that I've ever read about art is Jennifer Doyle's Hold It Against Me. And that completely changed my perspective on performance art. And a lot of performance art today is enabled with technology. One of my friends is a choreography professor at NYU that programs dancers. And that's a completely new form of art. You have little people, tools, that are being driven by a human who uses technology to connect with them and buzz them in all the right places so they can dance. We've just mixed everything together and created something completely new that was not even possible 20 years ago without wireless technology. We'd have to poke the dancer with a stick at a distance, which would probably look really awkward. But here we are creating a totally new form, a completely new performance, a new thing. And so it's our responsibility to find these new forms, and then some of them will emerge as really important, maybe not this one, maybe something else. But we need to open our mind to technology being part of the art world, and the art having technology as an ingredient of it in any capacity.
And if I jump into your statement about the ballet, which I find really intriguing, I didn't know about that, but how long do you think it would take for people to fully accept it? And because at one point you will just accept it as a form of art, and then you almost have to accept it and embrace it. So how long? What do you think the next cycle will be?
I don't know how many of you go to things like American Realness or other performance art festivals that are really on the fringe of performance art. I have a hard time accepting those in many aspects and many capacities, because the things I see are just either so provoking or so absurd. I do this exercise of, okay, I don't understand what is going on. I don't think it makes any sense. And then I start thinking about it and start accepting what it is. I think a generation never accepts its artists during their time, and the next generation learns about them and understands why they were important. So I think it takes one generation to accept the art that we have now. Artists are the forefront, the reflection of our society today, but the society is not looking in its own mirror. It doesn't understand the artists, it doesn't accept them. They are always the future, not the present. What you see on walls today is now, but you don't know if you don't think about it that way. So that one generation, which is sort of 150 years average of human lifespan, maybe, in not so long. If we start living forever, that will become a much bigger problem. I don't know what it will do to art, and what we can say a generation is at that point, and how those people who live forever will accept art. Maybe they'll grow up being wiser and live multiple lifetimes.
Maybe to add to that, I didn't know that either, and it fully reminds me of the Bauhaus ballet. I think that what I really like about this concept is the concept. So to show something, even if the ballet doesn't show up every here and there, and you cannot import it into your living room, and there's always kind of this avant-garde and this pret-à-porter kind of art. So, but I really like it, even if it doesn't show up in any living room. It shows the concept and what you described here, the interaction between technology and human beings. And in this case, human beings were controlled by algorithms or by technology. Sometimes it's the other way around. it's a symbiosis, but it's keeping up with both, and I like the concept, even just to create something new out of the concept. Yeah.
And to add, this leads to a very important question whether humans are themselves actually machines.
Yes.
And if you think about it, we are maybe very complex biological machines. We follow some very, very simple rules, just like you would make up a fractal out of a simple formula. We have very complicated instances of some very simple rules. And if you accept that, then there's really no distinction between technology as we know it today and what humans are. And so the ballet dancer being controlled by technology, being controlled by a human, it's all part of the same universe and the same machine.
Yeah, and at first sight it sounds kind of awkward that we are just machines, but I fully subscribe to that concept. And if you go to the grocery store and look at some of the fruits, talking about fractals, and if you look at a fern or broccoli or something, they're always, it's a self-similarity, there are always very simple rules that keep repeating and create those complex forms. So in fruit and vegetables, you easily see the fractal concept that it is a vegetable, but at the end of the day, it's just an implementation of very simple rules at the end of the day. And so we're a little more complex maybe, but that fully subscribes to what you said, that we are biological machines. But I have to add, and that's why I have the light everywhere in all those paintings, I believe that there's something higher, even if it's just because we're so limited in our mind that there's something we cannot describe anymore. It's probably beyond our definition space, and that's the light here, and that's what I see as the higher values or God, but there's something higher, and that's maybe what separates us, the spirit, but you can totally argue that we are biological machines as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was actually, I should add that it was the first part that really drew me to your work, which is the spiritual part of it, right? So the light in each of these paintings, which is being repeated, represents something that's outside of us, right? And something that's higher than us, and we all have that in common, right? So the space man or woman, could be a woman, a man, there's no race attached to it, and we all have the same need, which is, looking for something that's outside of us and growing, and there was the first part, and there was the second part, which became ever more interesting, but it's incredible.
Maybe I can add to that as
yeah,
well. I'm sorry, maybe I'm speaking too much, but it's just so fascinating. Also to again show how much technology has always been part of our cultural background. Like these paintings resemble the Baroque, and I'm very happy that we talked about this before. Here it's very traditional early Baroque. It's black and white painting, Caravaggio, Zurbaran. That's what this resembles here, and we had this conversation. It was really good. The Baroque artists were the first 3D artists. They integrated painting, stucco, architecture. They even used technology, like when they projected, or how they created trompe-l'oeil and the ceilings of churches. They used a fire and put a fish net above it to create this spherical grid projected to the screen, the ceiling, and it's a concept that's still being used today in 3D software. So that is an example of where hardcore 3D technology was at work already, and still it was about this mystical additional thing that you cannot describe. You see an astronaut and it represents the technology, human being, tech-driven human being, but you also see the light. Actually, you only see the reflection. You see it in the visor, you see it on the suit. You don't see the source of light. And there are no stars around it, so if the light would go off, there's nothing else. You don't see anything. It would be black. So it's the light, it's the spirit, it's the higher value, it's God that does have an impact on us, and that actually kind of creates us and makes us what we are, and by that way real. And that spins back to what's real and what's not.
Fascinating. So last question before we throw it into the audience, and for you to ask some questions. We've talked a lot about brands, Marc, you and I, on the importance of brands nowadays with artists. There's a lot of important collaborations that have started more recently, but it's been going on probably for the last 2 decades, of the aesthetics of art in other industries, whether it's fashion or tech, going back to tech, so it's kind of like a juxtaposition. who do you see, you personally, to be the, I call it the MVA, which is the most valuable artist. I like the MVA, so that's why I kind of draw the connection. But in 2050 of contemporary art, this could be a specific person, or it could be a profile. What does it need to take for somebody in 2050 to be the most valuable artist?
To be honest, I think that the question, the answer to me is very simple. It's the one who touches most. At the end of the day, it's still about reaching us emotionally, and because that leads to, I want to have this, I want to own this, and all the commercial aspect. But if you don't touch people with what you create, then you're not worth anything. And there are different reasons why you touch people, but creating an emotion and starting the trigger, or triggering notions and thoughts around something, starting to see something you haven't seen before, starting to think about things you haven't seen before, if you can trigger that cycle, then I think you are relevant and you're important, and I think it'll be the person who touches most. And with brands, the first part of the question, I think it's an interesting evolution here. There was Microsoft Office, and it had very few components like Word and Excel and PowerPoint and Outlook, and then it broke apart into 148 apps on the smartphone. So it's this constant evolution that the many small things eat the few big things, like PCs, 8 mainframes, laptops, 8 PCs, now smartphones eat laptops, and then in the IIoT, industrial Internet of Things, very smart sensors and very small things then eat the smartphone. So I think the same happens with brands. It's not these huge monolithic brands anymore. They start collaborations with artists because they can easily get in and out. It's a very flexible thing, like microservices in technology that can interoperate with each other very flexibly. You start a collaboration, you drop it, you see what works out, and you use your brand as a conveyor of new messages. So I think that's a very interesting part of design, of commercial, of art, that there are all those collaborations.
Yeah, I'd like for you to answer the question.
Yeah, I think I hope that in 2050 we won't be able to say who is the most relevant, most popular artist. I think we are now at the peak time where we're simplifying things so dramatically that you suddenly have these big figures that are supported by really big brands, and we are generalizing everything, we're averaging everything. We have the Facebooks of the world, and those are, with great intention, those are just creating average, mediocre things, and I think that we are going, I hope that in the next 20 years we're going to go to more niche, more interesting, more in-depth search, and we're going to find something in those depths, including many artists, many more artists, many more small things, many more patrons. And then at the same time, we're going to see art, the mainstream art, become something much more global and experiential. But the people who are going to make those things are the ones who have influence on others, on many other artists. I don't think they're the ones who are the biggest names necessarily. They will have had very small impact in the beginning, but that will snowball endlessly. In technology, the people, some of these people are not even known. With a blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto, who is an unknown person, probably has defined the future of the entire financial and maybe art industry in some ways, with one single paper. That creation has impacted society already a little bit, and will probably impact it tremendously in the future. So I think it's those people who can see the future, who can paint it, and then who can give it to the world to recreate new things on top of. Those will be the ones that will really define what we are. And then of course there'll be brands that we need big companies to support the art world. We need to collaborate with them. We need them to spend more money on art so that we can have more art. And by creating more top art on the very top of the pyramid in terms of size, in terms of popularity, will enable many more people to become artists, and will be able to create more makers at those niche places that will become much more interesting and much more engaging for those who actually seek that. We have to remember the world is also growing really fast, and we'll have more people around. So it feels like we are just simplifying things a lot on the very top of this inverted pyramid, but sometimes it's a good thing. It's good to have popular things as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject just because it's changing so quickly. It was always the job of the curators to say what is supposed to be popular and what's not. Museums, and there's so many different worlds that it's sometimes hard to get the grasp of it. But I do agree that it's going to most likely be simplified.
And I think what's important is curators have an important role to play. And if in the past they said what was more important, I think in the future they need to say why. And explain what it's about, and go in depth and do the research and provide deep, meaningful explanations to all the things around us. And that's a very important job. We don't want shallow, superficial interest in art. What we want is real engagement. We want people to be born with it, live with it, die with it, and be reborn with it, depending on how you think of your humanity.
Yeah, that's really good, and it's almost full circle with going back to DaVinci, where it was really about the thinkers, and the philosophers, and the architects that were also artists, right? And I think it goes back to that time. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask questions and cover other subjects. So anyone wants to go?
First of all, congratulations on creating the love story of the century. I think that no other artist before would have thought of bridging to different worlds. I think the level of your emotional intelligence is quite astonishing. I'm thinking probably partially due to your scientific background as well. The fact that you have such a, as I say, I call it a high-tech renaissance man. I'm just very curious because when I entered the gallery for the very first time, I literally felt that I fell in love with a spaceman. It's something that bridging these two worlds so different that we never thought of before. We looked at space as some sort of like unknown territory, and you managed to somehow give space a soul. Also, I fell in love with the spaceman, I think, because I posted so many photos. I never fell in love with a man as intense as with your installation. So I'm very curious, because I noticed that in all your artwork, the spaceman is alone. There is no other spaceman with him or girlfriend or sort of partner. Is it because we are so alone in this world where technology, in one way, is incredible, but at the same time it alienates us. We sort of become so alone and so estranged. Is it somehow the idea that a spaceman is alone, or is something that organically grew through your work?
Very good question. First of all, I tend to refer to it as the astronaut or cosmonaut, because as Philippe said, that's also why it's wearing a helmet, because it is not even men or women or race dependent. It is a representation of an individual, just in very general. And whether he or she should have a partner or a friend, for me, it wasn't actually initially around space. It was more around the representation of technology versus the mystical higher. And I found space to be a topic that best represents it, because if you paint figuratively, you have to show it somehow. If you're abstract, it's a little easier. I don't know whether it's easier, but there's a different approach. But if you paint figuratively, you have to represent it somehow. And I thought space was the best way to represent super high technology. It's the ultimate dream to reach out for the moon and now for Mars and even beyond that. So that's why I chose space. And whether they should have a partner or not is, to me, not really the question, because it's this interaction between this individual and the light. So the light could be the partner. The partner could be the one that stands for the higher value that you're reaching out for. It's this interaction between you as an individual and something else, and that can be a friend, a partner, values, abstract values, or even God. So that's what the interaction is all about.
Just to add something, I found one thing that struck me, and I can relate to a lot of what you said. When I walked and saw this for the first time, I remembered I was actually lived in Gagarin Square in Moscow, and there's a monument to Gagarin, who was the first man in space, right there. And it reminded me a little bit. He wasn't it was never the person that was important, but what it symbolized and what it represented. And I think we all create our very personal story and fall in love with this space, this astronaut.
That's great. And also the concept of, you know, in the end of the day, we come to this earth alone and we leave alone, and everything else in between is learning, or, you know, looking for something outside of us, so it's quite symbolic. Any other question? No? Randy? Great.
It's so philosophical. I have a friend who's a very successful artist, and he's taking a strong turn on his own and taking a really strong bid on artificial intelligence. And it's nothing that he'd done before. And I just want to, I mean, it's kind of a vague question, but, and I'm not getting into the biological versus, you know, creation argument, which I'd love to avoid. But, you know, in 10, 20 years, you know, if someone like Kurzweil is right, or whatever, we're going to get close, right? Or we're going to have machines that can, computational power will just be absolutely mind-blowing, right? And of course, tradition of art history, you know, at least 50 years in views, we see the person who broke the rules most astoundingly is the ones who stay, you know, in the record books. Usually being unique and the first person to think of something. So if we have these machines that can probably have the computational power of, I don't know, 100 human beings in one thing, the intriguing argument was like, oh my God, you know, something could start to create art. I mean, art could advance so much faster, possibly with a piece of artificial intelligence than could a human being. I'm not making an argument either way here, but I'm just want to get your opinion and see what you think, since you both are so much more educated in mathematics and technology.
I'll take the first answer. I'm very much on the side that singularity is coming, and that machines will evolve very quickly to a place where they are able to create things and evolve very, very quickly without our help. And I think of them as another species that will not be what we think they are today for us, like a tool exclusively, but they'll be a thing and they'll evolve. I do think that machines will be much better than humans at being good citizens of the world, and will be less destructive and will not think of humans as something in their way, but will quickly, hopefully quicker realize that just like humans look at nature and animals, that those are necessary for their own survival, and that the best way to live with those inferior beings is to collaborate and live with them in peace and find a good symbiosis and a balance in that world. And I'm excited to see what machines will come up with in terms of art. And right now we are in the early stages of machines that are making art. I love Planetoid. There's a Bitcoin-based art piece that commissions artworks today from actual artists. You send in Bitcoin, and then it commissions a random artist to make an artwork. It's pretty cool. Look it up. This is the early days. Add some AI to that, and then it will be on its own. It will make amazing things. And I'm excited to go to a gallery one day where the artist is an AI, not a human. Not that there's anything wrong with humans creating.
Well, Well, what I would like to add to that is a little perspective. I mean, there was a high of AI in the 80s, and in the 80s, they projected that in 20 years, almost exactly the same thing you described. And I tend to go a little back and say, if it's 10, 20, or 30 years out, like if it's 30 years out, it means never, 20 years means likely, 10 years means, okay, it seems to be possible. And that's one perspective. And on the other hand, there were programming languages like Lisp and Smalltalk, and Smalltalk evolved into C++ and ultimately Objective-C, and Objective-C is how you program an iPhone today, just as an example. So there are a number of things that can turn into, like the bullet could spark something else, although it's avant-garde, like Lisp was avant-garde development environment or programming language. And at the end of the day, it's always a matter of what value we put into what algorithms and computers and robots do. Like, it might be the case that they can, obviously they can be better chess players, right? They can be better Go players, but try to look up robot challenges where a robot tries to pick up a ball in an old ruin, and they have a hard time entering the room even, right? So there are some things that they can be really, really powerful at, and then there's things that they are just incapable of. There's now robot challenges to play soccer. Okay, that works out fine because there's a lot of effort putting into solving this specific problem. And still, we are the ubiquitous, the all-encompassing entity on this world, and it's up to us to determine which value we put into the output, or where we put all the effort into when talking about big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics. I see it that way, that these are tools, and they can even be kind of upgrades to ourselves. They can be extensions, just like people with prostheses can probably run faster than people without that. That's totally cool, that's fine, they're tools. But it's still up to us to define what value we put into that and where we put the development effort, and by that way, how we build our own future.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I study the intelligence of the heart, and I'm very curious what both of your takes are, because many people argue that the new frontier is outside of us, is space, correct? And many other people are arguing now, including HeartMath, which is a research lab in California. They work with Stanford. They've studied the intelligence of the heart, the science of the heart for 20 years now. And I'm curious what your opinion or insight may be on the inner exploration, the emotional, the heart intelligence, our own technology from within.
I love this question. We always seek the answers outside of ourselves, and most answers may lie inside of us. It's a very difficult realization for a cold Russian that I am, that there's anything inside of me to discover. Emotional intelligence, empathy, all those things is not something that I was born or trained or learned from my childhood at all. So I think in the same way that we use 2% of our brain, we have a lot inside of us that we yet have to find and be enlightened. And I think it goes back to understanding energy. And I love the theories around what the Egyptian pyramids were for, as maybe vehicles of energy, as maybe something that would emit something very positive and would enable us to feel things in a very different way than the way we know it now. Like something going through us that discovers and powers what's inside of us that we don't have, that we don't see today. So I think it would be incredible to rebuild the pyramid and see if the energy coming out of its smooth surface actually helps us discover something. Until then, I don't know enough well-accepted ways to discover internal energy that we have inside of us, and I think we recorded, so I'm not going to go into those details.
Yeah, and that boils back to, or gets back to the subject of these paintings. The astronaut is trying to reach out for the light. That's very emotional, and it doesn't care about his suit. It doesn't use a computer to do that. It uses the hand, even just the finger. So that is a very, very core human interaction with something. It's completely independent of technology. So there are no computers on that spacesuit, and so what I'm trying to say with that is, if something touches you, and that gets back to the question you had, like who's going to be an important artist in 2050, if he touches, and that's, at the end of the day, it's about the emotion that sets us apart from an algorithm and a machine, although it might be biological processes, but at the end of the day, there is something in addition to that, that is a spirit, that's soul, that's higher values. That's what I'm trying to show here, that if you're capable of touching someone like an old Arabid in the desert that doesn't have anything, not even food, and is still intrinsically happy, that's the ultimate goal you can reach, independent of all of the technology things we were talking about. And that's why I'm fully persuaded that technology is just a tool. It's a cool tool, but it's cool, and that's an emotion as well.
And I think art is a good place to start to look for what's inside of you. I find my own art practice a very meditative place, and I achieve very similar flow in making art as I achieve flow in programming. And it's kind of disconnected from the outside world and really being in a space that doesn't really exist. That's really a space inside of me. Similar things with sound meditation and closing your eyes and listening to things that are around you, silence, which space I think is a great place to be silent in. So I encourage everyone to spend more time with yourself and look for that energy. I think we learn all from our experiences there and can teach each other about it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Unless somebody still had a question.
I do have one more question.
Sure.
It actually goes back to a German influential designer, because you mentioned branding quite briefly. Karl Lagerfeld, the most influential German designer of all times, he actually dedicated his last collection to space. So the models were basically wearing just white and silver. And it's well known that a lot of major artists are doing collaboration with fashion designers. I was thinking, since Karl Lagerfeld is from Germany, would you be interested in a collaboration? And if so, how would you perceive it to happen?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very flattering question. Obviously, as said before, I think that it's great that designers and big brands do collaborate with art to add different perspectives, more content to it, and so that would for sure be cool, and especially to convey all of the things we talked about, to give it an additional audience, to reintroduce technology, as you said before, and to also do things that a traditional fashion designer cannot do. Because, as you said before, it's also about doing the impossible. It's doing the unrational things, and it's. I saw a documentary about Konstantin Gricic, also a Munich-based designer, and he said he often starts with the awkward, the ugly, to derive other things from that. And I like that approach. That although at the end of the day, I feel there has to be some sort of an outcome. At least that's what I want to achieve. It's great to do things that are irrational, to spark emotions again, and to spark something that no one has seen before. And especially in fashion, it feels like it's a revolution. It's always revolving. Like you keep seeing the same things. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is sculptures with high-tech materials. That's yet another output medium, and that's something I would love to introduce there, because there's so interesting materials that don't make a lot of sense but have such high aesthetic quality. And I'm not talking about carbon and car design and stuff, but really very, very innovative materials. Like the Fondazione Prada, for example, in Milano, they that place really touched me because they were playing with materials so fundamentally. You talk about fashion and the design industry, by Kohlhaas. And that's the playing with different materials that actually don't match together but have a high-tech background. That's something I can very well envision. And at first sight, it doesn't have anything to do with space, but at second sight, it totally does, because it's about touching, it's reaching out for something new, and it is very technologically at the same time while it is emotional.
Related to this, we should not forget art is a great source of ideas, and there's been a pretty consistent movement in hiring artists in startups, not necessarily to have a specific job other than to be around people and help them create new dimensions and new ideas. I think that's this kind of unexpected, when these collaborations don't necessarily have a goal but find something really beautiful as an outcome, that's when we realize, oh, this was all worth it. So I'm sure Carl works with many great artists and finds inspiration in places that we don't suspect. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was a great question, by the way. Thank you very much. We take it from here. So if you want to follow up with any other questions, welcome to email any of us. And yeah, thanks for attending. So I'd like to clap for